Have you ever noticed that the noisiest places in the world are also the emptiest of wisdom? While millions of voices compete for our attention on social media, screaming opinions about everything and nothing, a silent transformation is happening behind the scenes of our civilization. The deepest minds, those who traditionally guided our collective reflection, are retreating into silence, not out of disinterest or resignation, but from an acute perception that wisdom, in its purest essence, cannot flourish in the environment of constant noise we have created for ourselves. This retreat is not accidental. It is an evolutionary response to preserve what remains of genuine thought in a world that has confused information with knowledge and knowledge with wisdom. Imagine a librarian trying to organize books while a crowd screams around them, each person demanding immediate attention for their urgent but superficial demands. This is exactly what is happening to those who have dedicated their lives to understanding the deepest questions of human existence. They are discovering that silence is not just preferable, but absolutely necessary for the survival of reflective thought. For millennia, human wisdom was cultivated in spaces of contemplative silence. Greek philosophers walked in tranquil gardens, medieval monks meditated in isolated monasteries, Enlightenment thinkers retreated to their private studies. Silence was not just the backdrop of their reflections, it was the essential ingredient that allowed complex ideas to germinate and mature. Plato did not develop his theory of forms while responding to constant notifications. Aristotle did not classify ethical virtues between one Instagram post and another. Saint Augustine did not explore the mysteries of time and eternity while participating in heated Twitter debates. These thinkers intuitively understood something our age seems to have forgotten. Wisdom is like fine wine that needs time, silence, and special conditions to develop its complexity. Rushing it or exposing it to constant agitation results in something superficial and without depth, a cheap imitation of the original product. The transformation we are witnessing today is fundamental and irreversible. We live in the first epoch in human history when silence has become a rare luxury, almost inaccessible to most people. Our sound architecture has completely changed. Where once there were natural intervals of quietude, punctuated by occasional sounds, we now have constant background noise, punctuated by rare moments of relative silence. This inversion is not merely a matter of physical sound volume, it is a transformation in the very texture of human experience. Our ancestors lived in a world where silence was so abundant that any sound had meaning. A branch breaking in the forest, approaching footsteps, the wind changing direction, each sound carried vital information. Today, we live immersed in a constant cacophony, where most sounds are irrelevant, but our attention is constantly being fragmented by them. It is as if we had lost the ability to distinguish between what deserves our attention and what is just noise. Technology has exponentially accelerated this process of attention fragmentation. It is not just about the devices we carry, but about how these devices have restructured our relationship with time and space. Before, when someone wanted to share a complex idea, they needed to wait for the appropriate moment, the right audience, the ideal conditions. There was a natural filtering process that ensured only relatively developed thoughts reached the public domain. Today, any fragment of thought can be instantly projected to millions of people. The result is a massive inflation of poorly formed opinions competing with genuinely profound insights for the same mental space. It is as if we had transformed a carefully curated library into a noisy marketplace where vendors scream simultaneously, each trying to overcome the volume of the others. In this environment, wisdom cannot compete. It is by nature subtle, nuanced, requiring time to be understood. Meanwhile, simple and provocative opinions can be consumed instantly and shared without reflection. The most disturbing paradox of this situation is that the more connected we become digitally, the more isolated we become intellectually. We create echo chambers where our pre-existing opinions are constantly reinforced, but rarely genuinely challenged. True wisdom has always involved the willingness to question our own beliefs, to consider perspectives that make us uncomfortable, to remain in states of productive uncertainty while exploring complex questions. This mental posture requires inner silence, the ability to sustain the tension of doubt without immediately running to easy answers. But our digital culture rewards exactly the opposite. Quick responses, definitive positions, the ability to reduce complexities to 280-character tweets. It is no coincidence that the algorithms that govern our digital lives were designed to maximize engagement, not understanding. They show us content that will make us react quickly, not content that will make us think deeply. Quick reaction and deep thought are neurologically incompatible. When our brains are constantly in immediate response mode, we lose the ability to enter the slower and more contemplative mental states, where genuine wisdom is processed. Contemporary sages are responding to this reality in fascinating and varied ways. Some have completely withdrawn from public digital platforms, recognizing that these are simply not compatible with the type of intellectual work they do. Others have created small private groups where they can explore ideas without the pressure of instant public scrutiny. There are still those who have established ritual periods of digital silence as if they were modern monks observing canonical hours of contemplation. They have understood that in a world saturated with information, curation has become more important than production. We do not need more content, we need better thinking. And better thinking requires better conditions for thought. This retreat to silence is not escapism or elitism, it is recognition of a practical reality. Certain forms of knowledge simply cannot be cultivated in environments of constant interruption. Just as we cannot perform brain surgery in a noisy nightclub, we cannot develop deep philosophical insights amidst the chaos of fragmented attention. This situation creates a growing and concerning division in society between those who have access to contemplative silence and those who remain trapped in the cycle of constant distraction. silence is becoming a class privilege. Those with financial resources can afford to disconnect to create physical and temporal spaces protected from digital intrusion. They can pay for silent retreats, for country houses, for assistants who manage their digital communications. Meanwhile, those in more precarious economic situations often depend on their devices, not just for entertainment, but for work, education, and basic social connection. They cannot afford to disconnect because disconnection can mean loss of economic opportunities or social isolation. This dynamic is creating a new form of inequality, contemplative inequality. Those with access to silence can develop deeper understandings of themselves and the world, while those without this access remain trapped in patterns of reactivity and distraction. This is not just an individual issue, but a matter of social justice. If wisdom becomes the privilege of a few, the entire society becomes intellectually impoverished. Modern science is beginning to validate what contemplatives have always known. Silence is not just the absence of noise, but a specific neurological state that allows unique forms of mental processing. When our brains are not constantly reacting to external stimuli, they activate what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a set of brain regions that become active during resting states. It is during these moments of apparent inactivity that our brains make their most creative connections, integrating disparate information and generating innovative insights. Silence, therefore, is not passive, but profoundly active at a neurological level. It is the state in which the brain can reorganize information, form new associations, and develop more complex understandings. When this process is constantly interrupted by demands for external attention, we lose not only the ability to relax, but the ability to think in genuinely original ways. It is as if we were constantly preventing our brains from performing their most important function, the creative synthesis of experiences into wisdom. I need to pause for a moment to ask you directly. When was the last time you spent a full hour in real silence, without music, without podcasts, without notifications, just with your own thoughts? If you are like most people, you probably cannot remember. And if you try to do this now, how long would it take for you to start feeling uncomfortable, anxious, wanting to pick up your phone or turn on something to fill the void? I know that many of us have developed a kind of allergy to silence, an inability to be alone with our own thoughts. But perhaps this discomfort is exactly what we need to examine. Share in the comments. The last time I was in complete silence was. Your experience can help others realize that this difficulty with silence is not a personal failure, but a collective symptom of how we structure our lives. Sometimes, recognizing a pattern is the first step to questioning it. The consequences of this flight of wisdom to silence extend far beyond individual intellectual life. When the most reflective voices withdraw from public debate, what remains is increasingly polarized and superficial. The most complex issues of our time, climate change, inequality, technology, global governance, require exactly the kind of nuanced and long-term thinking that can only be developed in contemplative environments. But these are precisely the voices that are becoming increasingly rare in public discourse. The result is a deterioration in the quality of our collective conversations about the most important challenges we face as a species. We are left with debates that generate more heat than light, more division than understanding. It is as if we were trying to solve complex equations while everyone shouts different answers at the same time, without anyone having time to actually work on the calculations. This dynamic is not just inefficient, it is dangerous. In a world where our collective decisions have increasingly far-reaching and irreversible consequences, we cannot afford to make decisions based on superficial understandings or momentary emotions. But perhaps there is something hopeful emerging from this crisis, a growing awareness that we have lost something essential and an active search for ways to recover it. We see this in the explosive growth of interest in meditation, not as religious practice, but as mental technology to recover the capacity for sustained attention. We also see it in the slow media movement. People deliberately choosing to consume less information, but of higher quality. There is a rediscovery of the benefits of periodic retreats from digital connectivity, not as escapism, but as basic mental hygiene. Some of the most innovative minds of our age are rediscovering ancient practices of contemplation, recognizing that certain forms of knowledge simply cannot be accessed through conventional methods of research and analysis. They require states of consciousness that only emerge when we give our nervous system the opportunity to slow down and reorganize. This is not rejection of modernity, but a sophisticated attempt to integrate the best of contemporary technology with timeless wisdom about how the human mind functions optimally. What is emerging is a new ecology of attention, where some people consciously assume the role of contemplative curators of human experience. Just as in any ecosystem, different organisms perform different functions, perhaps we are seeing a natural specialization, where some people dedicate themselves to keeping alive the types of thinking that require silence and time. These are not people who have rejected modernity, but who have chosen a very specific relationship with it. They may use technology, but they do not allow technology to use them. They may participate in public conversations, but only when they have something genuinely contributive to say. They may consume information, but they do so in a highly selective and intentional way. This posture requires a particular type of discipline and self-knowledge that is becoming increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valuable. They are serving as a kind of cognitive reserve for the human species, preserving forms of thought that could be lost in the race towards speed and superficiality. The question that confronts us now is not whether we should embrace digital technology, for that choice has already been made collectively. The question is how we can create a more intelligent relationship with these tools, one that preserves our capacity for the deepest types of thinking that define our humanity. This requires a fundamental shift in how we think about productivity and value. Our culture values speed, multitasking, the ability to quickly process large volumes of information. But these are not necessarily the most important skills for navigating a complex and interconnected world. Perhaps we need to develop new types of literacy, contemplative literacy, the ability to sustain prolonged attention to complex questions, silence literacy, the skill of being comfortable with states of mental non-action, depth literacy, the capacity to distinguish between superficial information and genuine knowledge. These skills cannot be developed through conventional educational methods that emphasize rapid information absorption. They require practices more similar to athletic or musical training, patient repetition, gradual refinement, willingness to remain with difficulty until it transforms into skill. Silence, we discover, is not the opposite of thought, but its natural environment. Just as plants need rich soil to grow, the most important ideas need rich silence to germinate. And perhaps the sages who are retreating to this silence are not abandoning the world, but preparing to contribute to it in ways we do not yet fully understand. They are betting that in a world saturated with noise, the most powerful voice may be the one that speaks only when it has something truly important to say. This may be the deepest wisdom of all, recognizing that not every moment requires our voice, that sometimes the most generous contribution we can make is simply to create space for deeper insights to emerge. If these reflections have touched something you have been feeling, but perhaps have not found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided.
So what is the most common portrait in the world? What is the most famous face in the history of humanity? It is the face of Jesus. I mean, there are more portraits of Jesus than of any other person in the history of the world. Billions and billions produced over centuries in cathedrals and churches and homes, and fully 100% of them are fictional. There is not a single authentic, truthful portrait of Jesus anywhere. We have no portrait of him from his own lifetime. The Bible doesn't say a single word about how he looked like. There is not a single word in the Bible, whether Jesus was tall or short, dark hair or blonde or bald, nothing. All the images, and it's one of the most famous faces in history, it all comes from the human imagination. And it's still very successful in inspiring people and uniting people. Could be for good purposes, charity and building hospitals and helping the poor, but could also be for bad purposes, crusades, persecutions, inquisitions. But either way, the immense power of a fictional image to unite people.
They suddenly feel that they cannot rely anymore on the international order. They cannot rely anymore on America. For most of history, governments, whether of democracies or of dictatorships, of empires or city-states, almost all governments spent more than 50% of their budget on the military. In the early 21st century, countries felt so safe that the average expenditure on the military was just about 6 or 7% of the government budget all over the world. In contrast, about 10% of the budget was spent on healthcare. This was the first time in human history that governments spent more on healthcare, on nurses and doctors and hospitals, than they spent on the military, on soldiers and warships and fortresses. And unfortunately, this is now changing. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with policies of the Trump administration, countries again feel unsecure. They feel the only thing that protects us against invasion and conquest by a stronger country is if we have a bigger military. And countries in Europe, countries in East Asia and elsewhere, they suddenly feel that they cannot rely anymore on the international order. They cannot rely anymore on America. They have to increase their military budgets, build bigger armies. And of course, if everybody does it, you'll have an arms race, and the situation will just keep deteriorating. Why do humans